When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
A warmer from the low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to be chatting with him about teams that play a unique style, and I'm so glad that I've got Ryan on for this podcast today because he was a part of West Virginia's coaching staff. I think that he was a graduate assistant at the time when they were doing the old Press Virginia style, so he had an up-close and personal view of everything that we got there. So we're going to be chatting with him about how playing a unique style can be an advantage and a disadvantage, which teams he takes a look at in this day and age that play a very unique style and it works out well for them, just how you want to be gauging these teams. We're also going to be talking about a few SEC teams that might provide a little bit of bang for our buck towards the beginning part of the season with the way that they do play a little bit more of a unique style, the athletes that they have in general. And then I want to talk with him about this as well because typically coming into a college basketball season, we take a look at some of these teams that maybe made a deep run and a little bit of regression coming. Well, with 4 1 seeds making the Final Four, not a lot of upsets in the NCAA tournament last year. We don't have as much of that. So how do we gauge some of these teams that we might want to bet/fade towards the beginning part of the season because there's not as much of that dynamic this year as well. And I just have to ask Ryan about some of the teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on. I know he's going to be revealing a little bit of his top 25 as well. So we've got ourselves a lot to talk about with Ryan today, and we're doing that on this podcast all throughout as I'm with you guys every single day, regular season and off season. You're right now getting a lot of two-part conversations just because, well, all the news of college basketball is pretty much done with regards to conference realignment. Also with regards to the transfer portal, obviously that is dead at this point. So we're doing a lot of two-part chats, and you can expect a lot more conference previews in the next few weeks as well. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And if you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. It is all powered by Edge Boost, by the way. Edge Boost making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds 24/7, 365 on leap years, 366 days of the year, as all gambling and related transactions get approved 100% of the time. You're able to earn cashback rewards as you use Edge Boost, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, Greg. That's going to get you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend and Ryan, who does great work, not just with the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, but also with the Ryan and Rush Show. He does that all dedicated to West Virginia athletics. And then for the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, he does that with Kobe Dant, who does amazing work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, and he joins me quite a bit on this podcast as well. They also do a little bit more than just college basketball. Right now they're previewing every single one of these college football teams for the upcoming season as well. So those guys are very hard at work. Ryan always delivers such great insights, and you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac, spelled M-A-C on Mac. And Ryan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you having me, Greg. Hope the summer's going well.
The summer is going well. It'd be a little bit better if we had college basketball, but that's not the way that the summer works because college basketball is a winter sport. So we are very much gearing up for the next few months. And Ryan, I know you're doing a great job of gearing up for the upcoming season. And how do you take a look at teams that have it, as I like to call them, unique styles? Because you're very much someone that had a front row seat to it many years ago with Press Virginia, all that they were able to do. You were under the Huggins coaching staff back in the day. You were over there at West Virginia at the time. And I do think that it is always so interesting to look at these teams because they seem to have the most volatility, and it either seems to go really, really right or really, really wrong with not a lot of in between.
It's a fascinating way of looking at it. I mean, there's so many different ways to skin the cat, as they say. You can play super fast. You can shoot a bunch of threes like a team like Alabama, or you can play at a snail's pace like we've seen with Tony Bennett in Virginia. Texas A&M with Buckyball going over from Stanford. Does he bring that style and that chaotic pace that we saw him play at the mid-major level down there in the SoCon? Does it translate to the SEC? So I think the biggest thing is whatever you commit to, you got to go all in on. In leagues where you're kind of a unicorn like we were with West Virginia, nobody else pressed, I thought it always gave us an advantage just because our opponents were never ready and prepared because it was the first time they had seen that kind of pressure. Now, when we played them the second and third time in league play, they were a little more prepared. But the first time, and especially on short prep and when you get to March, teams with unique styles, I feel like always have an advantage. Syracuse with Jim Boeheim always comes to mind with that 2-3 zone. If they got somebody on 48 hours of prep, it always felt like they had the upper hand just because you never see that kind of zone throughout the season.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that it's so much fun to be able to take a look at some of these teams as well, because there are some times where it flames out tremendously, like when Houston Christian was trying to go up tempo out there in the Southland for many, many years. That was not great, to say the least. I remember Savannah State, rest in peace to them at the Division I level back when they were in the MEAC. Man, they would get blowtorched. But you give up 100 points to Wisconsin, you know that your defensive style is not going well. And I'm not talking about this year's Wisconsin. I'm talking about the Bo Ryan Wisconsin team. But I mean, that's always a lot of fun as well. And just sometimes when it goes terribly wrong, what do you attribute that to as well? Because we always love the examples of where things go right, like with Press Virginia. That was absolutely tremendous. We've seen Abilene Christian win a game in the NCAA tournament. Stephen F. Austin, their pressure style, that has worked out really well for them, but I just brought up a few examples of where it just went horribly wrong.
You can throw VCU in that with Shaka Smart, the Havoc era, getting that all the way to the Final Four and then multiple NCAA tournaments as well. He was an example. He didn't bring that to Texas and Marquette. He kind of changed and he went more half court with his defensive pressure once he got to the Power 5 level. I think when it doesn't work, you just don't have the right personnel to fit what you're trying to do defensively or offensively. And sometimes I feel like the coaches are just a little bit too stubborn and not adapting their roster or their playing style to their current roster.
Yep, absolutely. There are just some coaches out there that they're trying to fit square pegs into round holes, and sometimes that just doesn't work out too well for them. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan McIntyre. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And obviously, there are some very demonstrative examples of teams that they, in this day and age, are very much playing unique styles. Like Merrimack out there in the NEC is one that really comes to mind for me in this day and age. You still have Stephen F. Austin doing so as well, but they just couldn't make a three to save their lives last year, so they're going to be an interesting team as well. But are there a few teams out there that you look at them perhaps a little bit differently in the non-conference portion of the schedule compared to the actual conference schedule? Because I thought that you brought up a great example in Syracuse where they always had success in the NCAA tournament, but teams out there in the ACC, they were able to figure out that zone. They were able to attack it. And I think that those are some teams that are really interesting to look at towards the beginning part of the season. A team like a Syracuse a few years ago where they would do a great work outside the conference, they would struggle in conference, and then they would surge once again in the NCAA tournament.
I think teams like Alabama, Auburn, Florida that kind of play that more up-tempo and they keep throwing athletes at you. I think that they've had a lot of success over the last couple of years in the non-con. Purdue had a ton of success with Zach Edey just because nobody really sees the 7'6" guy or 7'4" guy. Not even in regular life. Exactly. So I think that those are kind of some of the teams that have just had really, really good track records in the non-con just because of their style. And then when they get down into the SEC, I feel like it kind of wears them down a little bit. Houston is another team that comes to mind just with their tremendous pressure on the defensive side. It's kind of pressed Virginia in the half court in a way. Throw Iowa State in there as well just with their defensive pressure. So teams that just have these unique styles I feel like are always more set up for success in the non-con.
Yep, absolutely. And I joke about it, but in reality, if I were to hit up a Las Vegas casino and if I saw someone that was 7'5", 7'4", that's something that I would be taking note of too. So I can't blame teams if they're thrown a little bit off guard by not being able to guard the 7'4" plus guy. Taco Fall back in the day was always a lot of fun, but you brought up a lot of SEC teams like Florida, like Alabama, and I think that they're just such interesting teams coming into this upcoming season as well, because for Alabama, they bring in LeBron Philbin. He's going to be coming back for them. Obviously, they lose quite a bit with Mark Sears and company, but bringing back Philon, I think that that's going to be rock solid for them. And then with Florida, I know that a lot of people are going to be noting that they lost Walter Clayton and company, but I thought that they did a great job of being able to replenish that backcourt with bringing in Boogie Fland. And I look at these two teams, and I think that they could be teams that really surprise in the non-conference portion of the season.
I agree. I think Florida did a nice job to the best of their ability reloading their roster. They obviously lost the 3 guards that won them the national championship, but going out again, a guy like Xavier Lay, Boogie Fland, I think those are nice pieces. Alabama, yeah, they lose Mark Sears and some of the experience, but I thought they also did a really good job getting in the portal and getting guys that are going to fit the NATO system, whether it was Bethea coming over from Miami or Noah Williamson, Taylor Bowen, I think as well, coming over from Florida State's a nice get, and then Bristow over from Tarleton. So I think that all these teams reloaded. Auburn went out and got the leading scorer in the Big 12 as well. These programs, they just have a track record of winning. Auburn, not only, they went out and got Keyshawn Hall from UCF, but then went out and got a guy like Kevin Overton and Keyshawn Murphy as well, coming over within the SEC. So the faces change, but these coaches are so used to it now with just the portal and NIL era where you're replacing 8 to 10 guys every year, it feels like, on your roster.
No doubt about it. And typically a team like a Florida is a team that I like to fade towards the early part of the season, because when these teams go on these long runs in March, when they get hot at the right time and perhaps they play above their heads a little bit, those are usually really good fade spots, but I just fear that we don't have too many of those this season, and I want to talk a little bit more about that with Ryan McIntyre on the flip side. Couple with that with Ryan, we do have to talk about a few teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, and just how he's preparing for the upcoming college basketball season with regards to handicapping a lot of the top teams. That's coming up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Craig Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.
And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Ryan McIntyre, who does such amazing work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he does such an amazing job all 12 months out of the year taking a look at this great sport. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac. And for those that love West Virginia athletics as well, he does a great job with the Ryan Rush Show along with his duties over there at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. And we left off by talking about some of these teams that they were actually really good towards the back half of the season. Like typically I would be looking to fade a team like a Florida that won the national title to wrap up the season last year, here to begin the 2025-26 season, but this year feels a little bit different. Florida, I thought, was just undervalued going into the NCAA tournament to start with. I don't understand why they weren't in the mix with Auburn and Duke as best team in all of college basketball to start with, so I do feel like they were undervalued before they made that run, but those are typically teams I like to fade a little bit more. Obviously, when NC State made their Final Four run going into the season the next year, that did not go so well for them, but how do you take a look at things like this? Because typically it is a case where I like to fade these teams. Florida's going to be probably a little bit of an exception, but I do feel like this year is a little bit different because there weren't as many of those anti-air quotes surprise runs in the NCAA tournament last year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Greg. This year may be a little bit different just because it felt like those four teams were the most dominant teams the entire year, the 4-1 seeds, and they ended up getting to the Final Four. Not even really tested either. Maybe Houston in the Purdue game. Florida. Did, I guess. Yeah, Florida almost lost to Texas Tech and UConn, but other than that, it felt like the teams kind of cruised a little bit on into the Final Four. So I think you make great points. NC State 2 years ago, last year. Miami, yeah, the two ACC teams were just complete dumpster fires. Even FAU still made the NCAA tournament, but they were way overvalued and were bad ATS the very next year after making their run in Dusty May's final year. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Maybe we'll look to some of the Elite Eight teams more so than the Final Four teams.
Yeah, but I do think that's interesting because, with Texas Tech, I just don't know if they're going to be too badly undervalued because I think that Grant McCasland just always lives up to expectations. He did such a great job of being able to coach up that team, so I really love what he's able to bring to the table for them. And obviously Alabama is a team that we just talked up a few minutes ago. Did not look savory out there against Duke, but I think that it's so interesting coming into the season because we just don't have as much of that as we've had in past years, and now it's all about deciphering what the transfer portal pieces all were because another team that made the Elite Eight is Purdue, and I anticipate them being one of the best teams in all of college basketball. I think the lone question is, do they have the playing style to be able to cover some of those 30-plus lines that we know that they're going to get against insert your favorite mid-major here?
That's where when they had Edey, they were just so dominant in those kind of games. Purdue is such a juggernaut. They lose Edey, and then they just quietly win 25 games last year, get back to a Sweet 16, and then they're returning everybody. They bring back their backcourt. Braden Smith feels like he's been in college for 20 years. He's arguably the best point guard in the country. And they go out in the portal, they get a guy like Oscar Clough from South Dakota State. I think he's going to be a great piece to pair up with Kaufman Wren and Fletcher Lawyer. And Purdue and Houston, I think got to be 1-2 in terms of coming into the year with all that returning production.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I'm right there on Houston and Purdue. And then I do lump Florida in sort of that top five as well. I don't know, you take a look at the 3 through 6 spots, teams like this, but I do think that becomes a little bit more intriguing because Duke obviously has another really good freshman class coming in with the Boozer brothers. You've got a bunch in BYU that they went out there, they spent all that NIL money. And then I think that St. John's is such an interesting case as well because the one ailment that they had last season was their three-point shooting, and bringing in the likes of Ian Jackson and company, I think makes them look very spicy coming into this year. And I didn't even mention Michigan, who I really like with the XL Lendy board.
I'm just pulling up my top 25 that I released post-portal. I went Houston 1, Purdue 2, then I had the Johnnies, to your point, with those guards. It feels like they're actually going to be able to make a jump shot this year. BYU getting the number 1 player in the country, and then getting a guy like Rob Wright over from Baylor, and then having all that experience come back. I had UConn up there as well, bringing Caravan back, and then I think that they did a better job in the portal, and they got guys that fit. Texas Tech, Michigan, teams like Duke and Kentucky, and UCLA, I think round out my top 10. So it's a lot of blue bloods. It's a lot of teams that have just been really consistent over the last couple of years, and I think what we're seeing is just a little bit of separation of coaches that have just been really good in this portal era and have embraced the chaos rather than tried to fight it. Kelvin Sampson, Matt Painter, Rick Pitino, Dan Hurley, McCaslin, Dusty May, and John Shire and Mark Pope. So, and throw Pat Kelsey in there, I think, as well. What he's been able to do at Louisville, flipping them into a top 15 roster coming into year number 2.
Yep, I'm right there with you, as we do have our good friend Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work with the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Coupled with that, the Ryan and Rush Show joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And it certainly is going to be pretty chalky up there at the top. There's no doubt about it. But is there a team or two that you're looking at that a lot of people have outside of the top 15, top 20 that you do feel good about and you feel like they might be a little bit undervalued coming into the season?
I think I may throw Kansas up there. I think that it's not the sexiest team because they don't have the biggest names, but I still think that they're going to be pretty good. I like the pieces. I think that they're freshmen. And Bill Self, I heard him talking about it the other day, that he's the best one that they've had since he's been there. And we saw what Cooper Flagg was able to do last year. Is he going to be able to take that step and be one of the more dominant players as a freshman? And I think they just surrounded him with good veteran pieces of role guys on their roster, whether it's Jaden Dawson, Trey White, Melvin Council. I think that Kansas is flying a little bit under the radar just because they don't have all the hype coming in with guys like Hunter Dickinson and DeJuan Harris and KJ Adams and company.
Well, I do like the fact that they brought in a Peterson, so that always makes me happy on this podcast. You don't have to tell me about big names. If you bring in someone with the last name of Peterson, you're very much set up for success. And Ryan, whenever you join this show, you always set us up for success because you do such an amazing job. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Greg. You can find me over at the College Experience all year long. We're diving in. We're trying to get 136 done for all our team previews. We'll get there before week 0, I promise. And then we'll move over to basketball and start breaking down all those leagues as well.
Absolutely. And Ryan is doing such an amazing job, along with our good friend Kobe Dant over there at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, of getting us all set for the upcoming season, both college football and college basketball. So a big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, because we got 364 teams to look at, over 2,500 guys entered in the transfer portal, so there's a lot to break down to try to make this the most successful and profitable season ever. So appreciate you guys joining me today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
When my husband came home from his military deployment, readjusting was hard for all of us. Thankfully, I found Talkspace.
Talkspace provides professional support from licensed therapists and psychiatric providers online. Military members, veterans, and their dependents ages 13 and older can get fast access to providers, all from the privacy of their computers or smartphones.
I just answered a few questions online, and Talkspace matched me with a therapist. We meet when it's convenient for me, and I can message her anytime. It was so easy to set up, and they accept TRICARE. Therapy was going so well, my husband and I started seeing a couples therapist through Talkspace too.
Talkspace works with most major insurers, including TRICARE. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com/military. Go to Talkspace.com/military to get started today. That's Talkspace.com/military.